Joanne Kathleen Rowling is a sexual predator. That is my personal opinion based on the evidence available to me these last few years, evidence we will be discussing throughout this video so that you, the viewer, can weigh it to reach your own conclusion. But more specifically, she is a sexual predator of trans people, particularly trans women, exploiting their marginalised status in the UK to get away with said sexual predation. Not that any of this comes as much of a surprise. After all, her gender-critical ideology has, as one of its two foundational beliefs, the conspiracy that all trans men are actually cis white girls who are a sexual resource being captured by the Jews in order to destroy white Western civilization, and therefore must be zealously guarded. And I bring that last part up in light of the fact that Rowling's most recent weaponization of sexual violence against trans women was carried out explicitly in relation to one of the biggest promoters of said Nazi conspiracy regarding trans men. But first, a quick content warning for the following: sexual abuse, misgendering, transmisia, anti-Semitism, and Nazi fascism. If work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so I can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take this time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, mine's Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them. And we need to talk about Joanne Kathleen Rowling's history of weaponizing sexual violence against trans women. Because, no, this isn't the first time she has done so, but it is among the most brazen of her acts so far. The example that sticks with me was the incident last year in which Rowling publicly called on her 13.7 million followers to chase women into bathrooms, photograph them, and then post those photos online so that said women could be investigated for being transgender and further terrorized if they were thought to be. Just horrific incitement to violence against both trans women and women in general, since, contrary to the mantra, they cannot always tell. The person Rowling victimized in today's case is human rights campaigner and trans woman Frida Wallace, who runs the YouTube channel Frida Media. Frida is someone who routinely tackles anti-trans viewpoints primarily out of necessity, just like many of us who are forced to take up the mantle of human rights campaigner just to defend our very right to exist. Keeping in mind that the Lincoln Institute for Genocide Prevention and Human Security has issued not one, but two separate genocide warnings for the UK in relation to trans and intersex people. That's the corner we're backed into. However, speaking up in defense of your human rights in such a climate tends to get you targeted. In one example of this, the LGBT Alliance, a group consisting primarily of cis-het people LARPing as members of the LGBT communities, previously tried to get Frida fired from the Northwest Ambulance Service for having the audacity of calling herself a lesbian. Thankfully, nothing came of this after a review, but the point is, Frida is someone the gender-critical movement has been trying to take down for a long time. Enter Joanne Kathleen Rowling, apparently angry that Frida, who had around 500 followers on Twitter, had her blocked. Rowling took to posting a series of screenshots taken from Frida's account before ultimately tweeting out that, "Sadly, Dead Name's refusing to debate me. To prove I have no hard feelings that Dead Name does engage with some lucky women, here's a picture of him debating Helen Joyce. I hear he left an indelible impression on the audience. And the chair." Which was accompanied by a photo of Frida taken from an angle designed to look up her skirt. Rowling chose to share said photo with her 13.7 million followers, including, potentially, children, considering her most famous IP. And I need to be absolutely clear, this is not only a textbook definition of sexual harassment, upskirting is a sexual offence in the UK. But starting with the sexual harassment in general, as explained by Rape Crisis England and Wales, sexual harassment is any conduct of a sexual nature that is carried out for the purposes or has the effect of either violating the other person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for them. That is precisely what Rowling has done here, sharing photos upskirting Frida as part of a personal attack, very clearly creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, and offensive environment. We know there was active malice here in Rowling's repeated misgendering and dead-naming of Frida. There is no ambiguity here. Based on that and that alone, I feel comfortable stating that Joanne Kathleen Rowling has engaged in public sexual harassment and can thus be considered a sexual predator. But the thing is, there's more to this. Namely the fact that upskirting is a sexual offence that can carry with it up to 2 years in prison and can even result in a person being placed on the sex offenders register. Said law came into effect in 2019, with the Ministry of Justice writing that the Voyeurism Act outlaws upskirting where the purpose is to obtain sexual gratification or to cause humiliation, distress, or alarm. This includes instances where culprits say images were just taken for a laugh, or when paparazzi are caught taking intrusive images. So it need not be for the culprit's sexual gratification. Seeking to cause humiliation, distress, or alarm is enough to be found guilty. And I'm not the only one to call out Rowling's actions as upskirting. Another person to do so was Gina Martin, who, fun fact, was the lead campaigner that brought about the 2019 law in the first place. Gina took to Twitter, noting clearly that, "I brought the upskirting law into effect in 2019. Let's talk about that image J.K. Rowling shared. She did this to humiliate artist Frida Wallace. That is a specific motivation we included in the Voyeurism Act. We fought for and included it specifically because men often upskirt women, it is overwhelmingly men, to punish them for their bodies, clothing, and for being women by humiliating them. That's called misogyny, and it's what we're witnessing Joanne do here. Transmisogyny. It goes like this. 1. Target someone you dehumanize. 2. Assert power with demand. Joanne wanted to debate Frida. For me, a man wanted a yes to his advances. 3. If they refuse, punish them by capturing a humiliating image of their body. 4. Share it to exert power and humiliate. Exact same logic. Now, Joanne didn't capture this image and she didn't capture it beneath Frida's clothing, which adds questions about prosecution under the Voyeurism Act, though it doesn't 100% discount it. Sharing the image is a separate issue here, too. Even if it didn't fit neatly under the Voyeurism Act, that doesn't make it any less wrong. The law is never a guide for morality, and laws do not reflect the complex ways people harass and or assault people. Joanne is spending millions and committing her life to pushing trans people out of public life. She is a harassing, harmful bully contorting the logic of advocacy to hurt marginalized people and retain some sort of twisted relevance. I support trans people to live life free from harassment, harm, and dehumanization. I always will, because I believe in human rights. I do not and will never support a billionaire using wealth and power to harass and harm people of any gender. Clearly noting the potential legal limitations of the law, before going on to argue that if they discount what was done to Frida on a legal level, that doesn't make what Rowling did right, it means the law is wrong. That it wasn't expansive enough when it was created because nobody predicted this particular scenario. The reasonable conclusion there is that we should change said law to make sure that such instances are covered in future, since the intention and impact of said actions are identical. Rowling just had an accomplice who we'll get to in a couple of chapters. Point is, Rowling is no different to the man who weaponized upskirting against Gina. Those are her own words. That means the person who campaigned for years to get the upskirting law introduced under English and Welsh law is out there, very publicly condemning Rowling's actions as the very same violence used by men against her. That is what someone who actually protects women does. And Rowling is completely antithetical to that. This, of course, made Gina a new target for members of the gender critical movement, including Graham Linehan, who bravely told said human rights campaigner to fuck off. Because when people like Linehan say, let women speak, they of course mean only the small number of women who agree with and support their bigoted views. I am of course legally obligated to note that Graham Linehan's own wife, who was a pro-abortion campaigner in Ireland, divorced him and took the kids over his anti-trans crusade, a fact he will not shut up about in trying to blame trans people for ruining his life. However, the message from feminist and women's rights campaigners was clear. Rowling had engaged in sexual violence, if not legally under the current framework, then at least morally. Rowling couldn't handle this reality check and began pushing back, asserting that Dead Name was at a public event that was filmed with all participants' knowledge. Dead Name chose the fishnets and miniskirt. Dead Name boasted on stage about what he does with his female penis. You may feel squeamish about this picture, but Dead Name is a paraphilic exhibitionist who was having the time of his life. And that, again, Dead Name was free to wear whatever he wanted to that film debate. Curiously, I've never yet seen any middle-aged woman participating in debates on gender, donning fishnets and leather miniskirts to do it, or boasting on stage about how fuckable they are. But I'm sure you draw a discreet veil over such behaviour if they did. Many trans-identified men delight in wearing their paraphilia in public. Dead Name Wallace is one of them. Which anyone with any knowledge of sexual violence and the systems which uphold it will immediately recognise as one of the oldest and most prolific forms of victim blaming. That she was asking for it because of the way she dressed. This is no different to the arguments presented over the millennia by a million different predators and their supporters. This is rape culture. This is literally the last step before switching from the normalization of sexual violence to sexual violence itself, which, again, in my mind, Rowling also did in posting this picture, even if the law currently fails to account for said violence. Everything else Rowling asserts in this post is completely irrelevant. Unless Frida gave explicit and enthusiastic consent to be upskirted, which she didn't, as we'll get to in the next chapter, that is still sexual violence. J.K. Rowling is a rape apologist, making all the same arguments other predators and their supporters make when caught in the act. There is no point engaging with her beyond that. Not her attacks on Frida's casual yet completely benign clothing, not her assertion about Frida's motives, clearly projecting Rowling's own fetishization of trans people onto Frida to classify her very existence as inherently sexual. None of that. Everything, outside of evidence of Frida openly and enthusiastically consenting to being upskirted, is a distraction from Rowling's actions, her predatory behaviour, her, in a just world, crimes. Which brings us to the question of who is responsible for the photo. For while some have asserted that it was taken from the official video of the debate Frida took part in, that's not true. The photo was taken by an audience member none other than Maya Forstater, seemingly for the purposes of sexually degrading Frida in future. Forstater is the ghoul whose contract as a consultant for the Centre for Global Development Europe wasn't renewed due to her publishing a series of messages declaring trans women are men. Her colleagues saw the post and raised them as a potential discrimination concern, particularly working in the development sector, which is why the group decided to let her go once her contract had run its course. Forstater, feeling entitled to a renewal, challenged the decision on grounds that her anti-trans beliefs were a protected characteristic, yet lost the tribunal with a judge declaring that Forstater's views were incompatible with human dignity and the fundamental rights of others. And that's where the case would have ended in any just world. But sadly, we don't live in a just world. We live in a shitty one plagued by fascists. Forstater appealed, gained the support of the anti-trans infected system, and won, marking anti-trans beliefs as a protected characteristic under UK legal precedent, efforts for which she was personally thanked by Rowling. Since then, Forstater has only become more and more toxic, bringing us to the fact that she seems to have committed a sexual offence in 2023, as Frida explained in a recent interview with Dr. Rachel Saunders on the podcast Lavender and Steel.
The way to have that debate would have to be on a level playing field with a mediation and all that. And I would do it. I would not shy away from that. But then she started with these really nasty comments, which led her to post that picture that was initially taken by Maya Forstater. So I'm sat there, and I noticed Maya Forstater in the front row taking photos. Well, that's fine, people take photos at events and stuff, but she was looking at her phone and giggling and showing her phone to Akua Reindorf, who was sat next to her. Well, that's really creepy and weird. Why are they doing that? And I think they were doing that to intimidate me before I'd even said a word. So the picture that J.K. Rowling has shared was from me when I uncrossed my legs. Just as I did that, she took the picture. And that's what she zoomed in. You know, if you look at how far, if you look at the actual video of the debate, you can't see anything. The camera's way back. But she was in the front row and she zoomed in and she put it on her social media, on Twitter. And I thought, well, maybe, but I didn't see this obviously at the time. It's like a day later and people were messaging me saying, have you seen this picture? Somebody's both of you. And I thought, oh, God, I'm not. So I thought I'll give Maya the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe she didn't notice that you could see the top of my leg. Maybe she just posted it, didn't really angle it. But I knew she did because she was giggling when she took it. And she knew she was doing it to harm me. And I think because the comments underneath that picture, if you can still see the thread, she's still got it up there. There are people adding and doctoring that picture using like Photoshop or whatever to add genitalia, literally add what they imagine is there. And that to me is abuse. Right? And the fact that Maya Forstater kept that picture up and entertained the conversation because she liked some of the comments where I think somebody said, can we see Frida's balls? I think that was one of the comments and she liked it. So I've got evidence of that.
So, whilst Rowling might manage to fall between the cracks on a technicality, there's no doubt as to what Forstater was doing here, at least in my mind. Assuming the victim's testimony is accurate, which I have no reason to doubt, Maya Forstater, hero of the gender-critical movement, is a sex offender. Sadly, this is the UK, meaning that protections for cis people are rarely extended to trans people, as highlighted by Frida here.
The thing about it is, I did report it to the police at the time. And I had a conversation with a police officer, and he got back to me a few weeks later, said, I'm not sure if I can do anything about this. It was like, and at the time I sort of gaslit myself into thinking, maybe it was maybe I should have worn a longer skirt, maybe I should have worn trousers. Maybe I shouldn't have worn fishnets, you know what I mean? But the thing is with that, they call that fetish wear. But the tights were from M&S, the dress was from 16 Arlington, the boots were DKNY, and was looking at something interesting, actually, which made me laugh. You know Dawn Neeson, who's on GB News? She posted like that she likes to wear fishnets. And there was a really funny bit on one of the episodes of her programme where somebody pointed out, oh, you're looking a bit saucy in your fishnets. It was all a bit carry-on film. And it just reminded me of that anti-trans conversation, because it's actually just misogyny. It's nothing, I mean, there is trans misogyny, but if you're criticising somebody because of what they wear, I mean, you could make the argument that some things are appropriate to certain settings, yeah, but I was out on a night out, as far as I was concerned. I'd come down from Manchester to have a weekend in London, and that is how I was going to treat her. And it was an evening event. Went out for a meal afterwards with Mark again, and Peter came out.
So Frida was abandoned by the UK justice system, an act of state violence which, in turn, made her begin to question herself. Thankfully, Frida had the strength to pull herself out of that spiral, but it wasn't because she received the protection she deserved. It always disgusts me when transmissists, such as Rowling and Forstarter, pretend that the UK has been ideologically captured by trans people, whilst they can openly engage in sexual violence against us and face zero legal repercussions. But at least we can take this and salvage something by pointing out that when the government says gender-critical fascism is a protected belief, this is the sort of behaviour said beliefs lead to. Forstarter is the person involved in that case. And here she was, upskirting an innocent woman. Had I known about this incident at the time, I absolutely would have run a piece with the headline, "Police declare upskirting women a protected gender-critical belief." Because that's what they're effectively teaching society, that it's okay to upskirt a woman so long as she's seen as the wrong kind of woman. That is a pretty powerful tool to come up Rowling and Forstarter with. And I say gender-critical fascism because that is the nature of Rowling and Forstarter's ideology, as demonstrated extensively in our video exposing the fascism of gender-critical feminism. We not only give a solid definition of fascism, but then explore various ways the gender-critical ideology matches up. And one of our key pieces of evidence was the presence of none other than Helen Joyce. The person Frida was debating, the person Forstarter was trying to help in sexually violating Frida, and the person Rowling promoted in her tweet attacking Frida, tagging her in. And why wouldn't she? Helen Joyce is a close and personal friend of Rowling, with Rowling not only posing for photographs with her, but going so far as to label her as Rowling's battle buddy. That's how supportive of Joyce's work Rowling is. Joyce is also a published author, having written a gender-critical book titled Trans, When Ideology Meets Reality, a book in which she not only parrots the usual uninspired attacks upon trans people's existence, but goes so far as to argue that there is a global agenda responsible for the indoctrination of young girls, making them think that they're trans men. This is part of a gender-critical conspiracy surrounding so-called rapid-onset gender dysphoria, the pseudoscientific principle which argues that the way trans people come out has magically changed when it hasn't. To cut a long story short, a bigoted researcher sought out the most bigoted parents she could find, asked them if they saw any signs that their child was trans before coming out, and when they reported no, presented being trans as a social contagion, a disease. A narrative that completely ignores the fact that being in the closet, hiding who we are from people, including our parents, particularly people we can sense are unsafe, is one of the most widely shared LGBT+ experiences on this planet, so much so that it has earned a name, closeted. I'm not joking. The gender-critical movement pathologized being in the closet before coming out as a conspiracy to turn young white girls transgender. Now, who did Joyce present as the heads of the supposed global agenda? Well, George Soros, John Stryker, and Jennifer Pritzker, all three of whom are Jewish. That's right, this conspiracy is a double whammy of transmisia and anti-Semitism, blaming a shadowy cabal of Jewish people supposedly infecting society with transgenderism to bring down fertility rates and weaken white Western civilization. At which point, we've just reached the Great Replacement conspiracy. That's why so many gender-critical fascists are also white nationalists. And this is literally Nazi propaganda, the very same promoted in Nazi rags such as Der Stürmer in Nazi Germany, who accused Magnus Hirschfeld, a gay Jewish scientist, of doing the same. Nothing has changed. But that is who Forestarter and Rowling are supporting here, almost half a decade after the trans community called out Joyce's rancid anti-Semitism. Though this isn't Rowling's only tangle with a Nazi, but for more you need to check out our video on gender-critical fascism. Yet returning to the sexual violence at the centre of all this, it bears repeating that this is not the only incident. Rowling has, in the past, encouraged her 13.7 million followers to follow random women into the bathroom to photograph them before posting said photographs online with the intent to identify, dox, and harass them. This was a horrific act of incitement to violence, one which seeks to eradicate trans people in trying to force them out of public life by removing their ability to use the bathroom in public. And whilst trans people are absolutely the primary targets and victims here, it is worth mentioning that they wouldn't be the only victims. All women are at risk of Rowling's violence, particularly those who don't match up with fascist ideas of what a woman is. Butch lesbians, dark-skinned women, and those with medical conditions, including survivors of breast cancer. And that last example isn't a hypothetical. That has already happened. In fact, it had happened by the time Rowling called on her supporters to do this. At the start of the same month Rowling did this, Joe Morum of the Good Law Project went public about the fact that his wife, a breast cancer survivor, had been targeted and abused by gender-critical fascists, leading to a very public discussion on the matter. And Rowling's response to that was to make a post arguing her followers to photograph women in public bathrooms. That is the extent to which Rowling is willing to go to hurt all women so long as it hurts trans women. And we've seen another horrific incident recently, namely Rowling's management of Beera's Place, a trans-exclusionary rape crisis service set up by Rowling in 2022. After Amnesty International dared criticize the service in the same way it would a rape crisis centre that was founded for the explicit purposes of excluding black women or disabled women, Beera's Place sent Amnesty legal notice, seeking a full retraction of their report, a public apology, and a bar on all future criticism of gender-critical groups, a threat backed up by Rowling's billionaire funds. Unsurprisingly, the threat worked, leading to the report's retraction. Which is horrific enough, but what I'm interested in is a little anecdote Rowling shared last year, which resurfaced during this whole discussion. Namely how, "We had it when we set up Beera's Place too. I am a woman with PCOS and have a full beard. Will you still let me come for rape counselling?" one man told a support worker over the phone in his bass baritone. Strangely, on learning he was being recorded, he hung up. So to be clear, a woman who was a rape survivor called up Beera's Place, seeking assurance as she was worried that her polycystic ovary syndrome, now called polyandrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, which means she produces additional testosterone and thus has facial hair, would lead her to being mistreated. only to hang up when she was told that she was being recorded. Rowling decided to take that anecdote and blast it out to her 13.7 million followers, declaring said woman to be a man purely on the pitch of her voice, acting like there is no other possible reason that a rape survivor might hang up after being told that she was being recorded. Putting aside the horrific misgendering, transmisia, intermisia, and absolute refusal to even try and understand how scary it can be to reach out for support as a rape survivor, there is a safeguarding concern here. A rape survivor reached out to Rowling's support centre in a specific location, asked a pretty basic question, yet because she had a medical condition, Rowling decided to put that woman on blast to her millions of followers, sharing potentially identifiable information, which in the case of spousal rape, could absolutely lead to her being identified and receiving further violence, or other women with PMOS being misidentified and abused instead. All because Rowling wanted to own the trans community. Rowling is a monster. Her legacy is now one of sexual violence and victim blaming. That is all she will ever be to any person with a sliver of a conscience. And Frida has not escaped that legacy, as heard here.
It's this thing where why would a woman that has so much global reach and she's respected around the world, people think of her as a national treasure, why would she focus on somebody like me with 500 followers on Twitter? I've been on telly a couple of times, I've done a bit of public speaking, nobody's going to know who I am, so she has the power to change the course of my life, because for some people now, the only thing they're going to see when they say Frida Wallace, and when they Google that is the only thing they're going to see. So if I went for a job interview and somebody said, let's Google Frida, right? So that is really disturbing to me. And every job I've had, every charity, I get a complaint. A complaint will come in because they'll say, there's some charity called LGBT Alliance and Sex Matters. They put a complaint in about you. I say, yeah. Did they call me Fred? Yeah.
You've disguised.
But it makes me feel like, do I have to be an angel? Do I have to literally be the most perfect person? To be trans, do we have to be beyond reproach? Be more godly than anybody else? It's like that's the thing. But when people want to see us, we're demons. When we want to speak, we're invisible. And that is always been the way. It's like the anti-trans argument, the trans exclusionary argument is like a witch trial, because it's like, are you a witch? And you go, I'm not a witch. So you believe in the existence of witches? It's like, well, no, you said that. And it's like, well, what am I? If I say I'm a trans woman, I didn't invent that term. Academia did, and society adopted it because it was the most natural thing in language that seemed right. It wasn't like trans women walked down the road like, you're all going to call us women now. No, that never happened. It happened over a long period of time. And just because J.K. Rowling now thinks, I don't like that, so I'm going to use all my power, I'm going to use all my influence to change that. And it won't, because when I go shopping with my mum, or I go to church with my mum, all those ladies call me Frida, and they call me she, her, whatever it is. It doesn't even cross their minds. And if I told them what J.K. Rowling had done, they'd be horrified.
Thankfully, Frida is not alone. Along with the women in her life at home, she has her friends out there, supporting her, pushing back on the transmisic narratives.
Obviously, we have a friendship and we've talked about this and we've discussed this off air. But on the record, what the treatment you've been receiving both back in 2023 and what you're now receiving at the hands of this is utterly disgusting. And I think that, and I saw a post on Facebook this morning where someone said, this is misogyny, the height of misogyny, you're being slut shamed. If this had been any other woman, the police would have prosecuted because it is an upskirt camera. The fact it's another woman taking the picture, and this is where gender critics talk about trans women being sexual predators. The picture that Maya Forstater took of you was sexual predation. I will stand by that argument that it's being used to slut shame you and body shame you and treat you as an object of something lesser than any other woman in that venue. And it denies you your inherent identity. And as far as the way that the conversation has gone, if you look at how gender critics are trying to say that trans women are not women, and that they often use the idea that trans women are 60% of trans women in prisons are sexual predators, this is Maya Forstater is one of the leading gender critics in the UK, and she took a picture of you explicitly designed to destroy your identity. And now J.K. Rowling, who is also one of the UK's leading gender critics, is doing exactly the same thing.
And I'm just so happy she has that support, because she's going to need it. This sort of violence has a way of burning itself into you and coming back weeks, months, even years down the line. I just hope Frida can find the space she needs to heal, and I hope that one day she'll get justice on both Rowling and Forstater. But now, what we need to do is make as many people aware of this. If you have an adult sibling who has ignored your criticism of letting their children watch Harry Potter, ask them, why are you comfortable associating your children with a sexual predator? Because that is a very valid question. That should honestly be the default question anytime Rowling comes up, especially with politicians. Why do you feel the need to defend this sexual predator? Is it because she's a billionaire and you hope to benefit from her status one day? Is she your new Epstein? I think that's a very powerful angle to come from. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of our patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, Loombat, Boea, Deborah Goldsmith, Higgins the Seagull, Mix Alba, and Peter Cole. And with that, take care, and I'll catch you next time.